Lord, make us instruments of your peace.
Where there is hatred, let us sow love.
Where there is injury, pardon.
Where there is doubt,
Faith. Where there is despair, hope.
Where there is darkness,
Light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master,
grant that we may not so much seek
to be consoled as to console,
to be understood as to understand,
to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive,
it is in pardoning that we are pardoned,
and it is in dying
that we are born to eternal life.
Amen.
WESN.
Well, we hope you had a good holiday marking Diwali 2022. I'm Andy Johnson. Welcome to it here at WESN. This is how we're going to begin the program, the edition of the program today. AM Prime still was happening. We'll be talking in a little bit from now in the second hour of the program with Mr. David Rosenblatt. He's the Regional Economic Advisor for the Caribbean at the Inter-American Development Bank. And we're talking about the economic outlook in the Caribbean as we go forward. Generally promoting the work of the Caribbean Economic Department by highlighting main insights from the Caribbean Quarterly Bulletin. Those are among the things Mr. Rosenblatt watches. Also Trinidad and Tobago, the drive for digital infrastructure through digital transformation as a key factor for development and regional economic outlook. The post-COVID-19 situation, we talk about highlighting trends and lessons learned and key developments the IDB is working to put in place for us in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean. We'll talk with him on the other side of this hour. We're also talking with Professor Winston Sweet about this is a call for reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans, and that's a movement that is picking up steam and going forward with the enlarged calls across different parts of the developing world, the formerly enslaved people, for reparations of one kind or another. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have the descendants of African slaves, and we also have the people representing the descendants of the First Peoples, and these things are coordinated in different ways. There's a West Indian Commission looking at that, headed by the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Also, in a moment, we'll be talking with Mr. Dinesh Ramboli. He's the Member of Parliament for Shogunas West. There's a call on the Law Association to answer some questions about, well, the Law Association has called on the Attorney General, the current Attorney General, Reginald Amo, to answer some questions critical to understanding what lies behind the issue of Vincent Nelson and the former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi in that matter, which needs no introduction at this point in the game. We will get to that in a moment. Stay with us. The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
With society plagued by a host of issues, with debates surrounding our urgent concerns falling short, with questions of our future not always being answered.
The conversation continues. Join me, Kemuel Pascal, as the voice of the youth comes to life. We will confront the controversial topics of today's world to gain answers that are key for a better tomorrow. One and One with me, Kemuel Pascal. Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Only on WESN, Content Capital.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in-depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the Content Capital.
Welcome back to the program. Did the former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi participate or was involved in an actual collection of evidence for the purposes of prosecution? Did Mr. Nelson continue to receive legal fees from the government after he made a statement against interest in a criminal investigation? Those are 2 of 6 questions put to the current Attorney General by the Law Association followed its meeting, several days ago on this matter that continues to occupy, front page and top of the news attention in Trinidad and Tobago. Vincent Nelson and Faris Al-Rawi, an indemnity deal that went particularly sour. Dinesh Rambali is the Member of Parliament for Shogunas West. He's also an attorney. He's agreed to help us walk through this distance in this edition of this epic, you want to call it that. Mr. Rambali, thanks for talking with us.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning to your listeners, your viewers. It is my pleasure to join you yet again on the program. I know I like to discuss, more positive topics, right? Topics that have some positive feedback on it. Unfortunately, the topic which we are talking about this morning is not particularly one which I like because of the connotations, the impact that it has on our confidence and the administration of justice. So, Andy, I hear you call it, has the indemnity deal gone sour? Let me start off by saying that, prior to Nelson Gate, prior to this whole Nelson fiasco with former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi and Dr. Keith Rowley-led cabinet and his regime, I had not heard of an indemnity agreement where you can basically induce or somehow seek to influence a witness in criminal proceedings, initiated under the auspices of the Office of the Attorney General. So this is one of the first instances that I'm seeing this, and it is one which really does not bode well for the democracy. But I know we will get into the details as we get into the discussion.
Right, so the first question to the current Attorney General is, did the former Attorney General participate or was involved in actual collection of evidence for the purposes of the prosecution? The other question asked about Mr. Nelson, did he continue to receive legal fees from the government after he made a statement against interest in a criminal investigation? There are a couple of times that this issue came up about a statement against interest. What exactly is that? Two questions that I discern from what you have framed there. One is, let me take the one with the legal fees first. It is only the Office of the Attorney General who would be best positioned to give us the answer to that, whether or not Vincent Nelson, King's Counsel, would have received fees even after the indemnity agreement was entered.
and or even when the plea agreement was basically entered before the court, before I think it was Justice Holden. Now, what has happened is that why I say he's the best person, or that office is the best office position to say that, it may be possible that the fees may have been somewhat staggered for whatever reasons. If it is there was a bill of, let's say, $10 million in TT and fees, it may be that they had started paying him because, as you are aware, that there was a case which was brought by Vincent Nelson seeking his legal fees. And that case was settled by none other than Faris Al-Rawi as Attorney General. A consent order or an agreement was entered whereby he would be paid his fees. Now,
fees for his normal work, or fees arising out of this agreement?
No, fees for his normal work.
Right.
Now, you would recall, and probably we are jumping ahead, Andy, you would recall that there was the Petrotrin litigation against one Malcolm Jones,
yes, which
was proceedings initiated under the People's Partnership. And moving forward, what you had was that the PNM government, having gotten into office, there was a mysterious opinion which citizens of Trinidad and Tobago had to go all the way to the Privy Council to be able to get an order that that opinion be disclosed, and the Privy Council held that it was in the public's interest that such document, such opinion be disclosed. But prior to that Privy Council ruling, that was a document which was sealed very tight. What was that document? It was apparently an opinion which one Vincent Nelson himself, having given certain advice, then came under the PNM government under Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi's tenure, and would have stated that there was no reason or not sufficient reasons, or taking a position that there should no longer be a prosecution of this one Malcolm Jones. So that having been done, then immediately following that, you would have had a question of legal fees being claimed by Vincent Nelson. That matter reached the courts. He was actually suing the state, and all of this was taking place in or about early 2017. So the timeline is important. When you see these matters taking place in the public domain, what you have is an interaction between the Attorney General and one Vincent Nelson, and then there was a settlement between Vincent Nelson and Faris Al-Rawi as Attorney General, whereby the state agreed to pay him his legal fees. And next thing you know, and it is the same lawyers who are participating in the matters on behalf of Vincent Nelson for the state, against the state, sorry. So what happened is that you saw names like one Roger Kewal Singh, who was acting for Vincent Nelson. It is the said Roger Kewal Singh who would have been acting for Vincent Nelson when the indemnity agreement was entered. And subsequent to the indemnity agreement, you have the plea agreement. It is important that the public understands that a plea agreement is something that is governed by law, whereby the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, that he can actually enter into such an agreement. So that is where you have, in most developed countries, you have plea bargaining, and that plea bargaining allows a person to give certain testimony in exchange for certain things. So they will give testimony so that you will be able to actually capture, instead of having one person before the courts, you might actually now have three persons before the courts, in terms of probably a conspiracy to commit a crime, or, in this particular instance, you had several charges. So it is one thing that, the DPP is the one who is authorized and empowered under our law to do that. And here it is, you have an Attorney General who is not empowered under law, who under the Constitution, his remit is limited in terms of getting engaged in litigation. His remit is limited to civil matters. There is no power for the Attorney General to get involved in criminal matters.
Right, well, that complicates matters even further, because at one point in the game we saw where the Director of Public Prosecutions was rebuffing the approaches being made to him by the Attorney General, but ultimately the man was charged. So at some point the DPP got involved to lay the charges, not correct?
Yes, that is correct, Andy. What happened though is that what we have to be careful of is that the DPP, for all intents and purposes, based on the information that is in the public domain, the DPP made it clear to the then Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi that he knew nothing of this indemnity agreement, and that he even told Mr. Al-Rawi, when Mr. Al-Rawi was calling on the DPP in terms of saying that we must now honor this indemnity agreement, the DPP refused. The DPP said by way of a letter, I believe it was December 2020, indicated to Faris Al-Rawi in no uncertain terms that I am not the progenitor of this indemnity agreement, and it would be unwise for my office to get involved in something that I don't know of. And obviously, when you read between the lines, he was clearly saying, where does this indemnity agreement come from?
Right. So that is separate. That is separate and apart from the charges that was laid against Mr.
Yes. Well, you see that is separate and apart from the charges. You see, that's why we have to make the distinction between the plea bargaining agreement.
Right.
That is one which was entered with in terms of discussions with the office of the DPP. That matter went before the judge, the particular judge, and that plea was actually entered before the court. This indemnity agreement, which predates the plea agreement with the DPP, is an indemnity agreement which Faris Al-Rawi is saying that he took advice from two eminent, prominent senior counsels, one Gilbert Peterson senior counsel and one Douglas Mendes senior counsel. And according to Faris Al-Rawi, this is, of course, I'm saying this based on the information that has been reported in the public domain, print and social media. What Faris is saying is that I didn't enter that agreement of my own volition. I didn't do it alone. I didn't do it in isolation. I did this based on advice. And this is where we are asking questions, and the public is asking questions. Listen, if you were entering this agreement, who did you take advice from? In what circumstances was this advice sought? Did you initiate? In other words, did you of your own decide that you are going to follow Mr. Vincent Nelson for the purposes of making him a witness? Or did Vincent Nelson come to you? What were the conditions in which this happened? And this is why you have to take it against a background of where there were already interactions between Vincent Nelson and the Malcolm Jones case, where he would have rendered an opinion contrary to what he would have indicated before. And also his own case, Vincent Nelson's case against the state, against Faris Al-Rawi as Attorney General representing the state, whereby he was claiming to the tune of millions of dollars in legal fees.
I think the thing gets more complicated every day because in some of the reporting over the weekend, there was this story, I think in the Express by Rio Tate, that Mr. Nelson made some of these disclosures as a deathbed kind of confession because he was diagnosed with cancer at the time, and he probably wanted to clear his conscience. But it seems as though he got surgery and so on, and he's living probably past when he thought he was, and that may have made him change his mind about going forward with this. So that is inside there as well.
Well, Andy, again, until all the documents are not put forward and we have disclosure from the offices of the Attorney General, what happens is that, yes, it is true, to our knowledge, based on what has been reported in the press, he did give it as some sort of dying declaration. And law, there's provision for where you would have evidence given in certain circumstances. One is a dying declaration. So what happens is that he gave it under a certain pretext, and then what has happened since then? What has happened since then is that you have seen that arising out of the very indemnity agreement which Vincent Nelson entered with Faris Al-Rawi, there seemed to be now some disenchantment on the part of Vincent Nelson. In other words, he's now saying that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is breaching that agreement, taking the position with the DPP, the one who is lawfully empowered to conduct criminal proceedings. Vincent Nelson is holding up this indemnity agreement and telling the DPP, your state of Trinidad and Tobago is in breach of this indemnity agreement. And until I do not have remedies under this particular agreement for the breaches, I am not going to give evidence under the plea bargaining agreement I entered with you.
Right, and
so
let's understand this. So,
yes.
So the breach is that he is contending that it ought not to be shared with anybody in any position, even people who are in a position to review this and make some kind of pronouncement on it, right?
That is correct. This indemnity agreement goes even beyond the criminal matter before our local court. involving Anand Ramlogan and Gerald Ramdeen. This agreement goes further. It does indicate that, well, amongst other things, it does give an undertaking to Vincent Nelson. The state of Trinidad and Tobago is now committed to Vincent Nelson that it will not disclose any of the information that it has in relation to the criminal charge or otherwise to any foreign authorities. So that he, you know, in other words, it is an indemnity which goes beyond the remit of the local proceedings, that it will not be disclosed. Vincent Nelson is saying that no, the state of Trinidad and Tobago, and he's, you know, based on some of the media reports, it goes so far to suggest that Mr. Minister Stuart Young disclosed information and or the agreement to the Crown Prosecution Service in the United Kingdom. So that is one of the breaches that he refers to. And that is where he is suing now the state of Trinidad and Tobago. So you have the collapse of a criminal case, right, involving Anand Ramlogan and Gerald Ramdeen. And Vincent Nelson now being in a position to give evidence, but saying he's refusing to give that evidence because of the indemnity agreement, is now turning around. And he has, in fact, sued Trinidad and Tobago. If I'm not mistaken, it is a lot of money. I mean, it is millions of dollars again that he's claiming. But Andy, what it boils down to, and I know people may sometimes get a little bit confused with the nitty-gritty of the substratum, the factual substratum of this whole thing, and they need not get too perturbed about the facts of the matter. And you know exactly what the timeline is. They don't have to commit these things to memory. What are the key takeaways in terms of our democracy?
Yeah.
Number one, if anybody, whether it be Vincent Nelson, whether it be Anand Ramlogan, Gerald Ramdeen, Dinesh Ambali, Andy Johnson, or any one of your viewers and listeners, if it is any citizen who goes before the courts, they have been charged and they go before the court. Under our constitution, they are entitled, they have a fundamental right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. That is number one. Number two, that process between being charged, well, the collection of the evidence, the investigation into potential wrongdoing, the actual laying of the charge, and then going forward with a prosecution towards, having it determined before a court of law, that whole process must be one which we say is due process. Any citizen is entitled to due process. It must be fair and impartial administration of justice, and they must go through the court system in a fair manner. So that is what is the key takeaway for any citizen. That is guaranteed under the Constitution. The other part about it is, okay, that is the rights of the accused. And it involves the office of the DPP and the collection of evidence by the police service and the matter proceeding before a court. The other side of that same coin is that what is the public's right in when you have these criminal proceedings? The public's right is to ensure that there is prosecutorial independence. In other words, any ordinary citizen has an interest in any criminal proceeding, and that interest is that it must be conducted in a manner which ensures the fairness towards the accused, so that when it is that person is actually convicted, that person is convicted according to law. So the public also has an interest in the administration of justice, notwithstanding that they are not the ones who is charged before the court. And this is what is at stake here. What you are seeing is that you have seen a total erosion of the prosecutorial independence of the office of the DPP. And there's a reason why the office of the DPP is somehow insulated under the Constitution. That is the only body that is empowered to deal with criminal prosecutions.
Where is that evident? Where is that evident?
That is Section 90. That is Chapter 6 of our Republican Constitution.
Yeah.
And
What I mean, where is it evident that the role and function of the DPP in this matter is being suborned? That's a term you'll use.
Right. So, the role of the DPP is to ensure that the evidence, so that if police collate evidence and they are somehow unsure as to the charges, they can seek the advice of the DPP. They don't go to the Attorney General. So let me tell you, by way of convention and practice and distillation of the principles of under the Constitution, one, you don't see police officers lining up by the office of the Attorney General to say, I'm not sure if to charge Dinesh Ambali with sedition. He made a statement on Andy Johnson's program, and I'm not sure. No, they would have to go to the office of the DPP. And if it has to be charged under that particular law, sedition, I choose that because it came to my mind. First of all, there's a provision in that law where they need the consent of the DPP. But let's take another charge, misbehavior in public office. They don't go lining up by the office of the Attorney General. What they would have to do is they would go to the DPP. The DPP would say there's not sufficient evidence. There's a need to collate further evidence. You need to investigate here. The DPP does not get down into investigating per se, but the DPP renders advice. That is number one. Number two, when charges are laid, it is only the DPP who has the remit in terms of continuation or discontinuance of a matter. And that is because the DPP is empowered to deal with criminal matters. In the instant case involving Ram Logan and Ramdeen, before the DPP could even enter any plea bargaining agreement with Vincent Nelson, the virtual witness at that point in time, you had an Attorney General who is entering into an indemnity agreement with the witness, basically inducing the witness that, look, for you to give evidence against my political opponent, I am prepared on behalf of the state to do A to Z. And it went A to Z and started back letter A and went back a whole alphabet again. When you look at exactly what took place.
Putting it for the understanding of the ordinary person, what you're saying there is that people would say that this thing went bad from in the morning.
It didn't went bad. You first of all, number one, you had no authority under law to initiate any kind of discussions, let alone elevate those discussions to one of codification of the indemnity agreement. So it at the very outset, ab initio, this thing was contrary to law, contrary to constitutional principles, subversive of our democratic principles.
Right. So let me ask you if you think that the current Attorney General is he obliged to answer these questions put to him by the Law Association?
Yes. The short answer is yes. But I want to say not only the Attorney General. If you have a cabinet, and it is clear now in the public domain that the knowledge of Faris Al-Rawi was knowledge of other cabinet members, namely the Prime Minister, Minister Stuart Young, the Minister of National Security, the Minister Sagram Singh, who is Minister in the Office of the Attorney General.
Who are the people he said he spoke with about the matter?
Yes, all of these persons have a duty to come out and indicate what was their role in this matter. And the present Attorney General has to speak out, because at this point in time, the present Attorney General, as the titular head of the bar, as a person who is deemed to be central to the administration of justice, one who has, and remember again, under the Constitution, the Attorney General does not only render advice to Cabinet, the Attorney General is the one who ensures the welfare of the citizenry. So the rights of the citizens are protected.
He's obliged to answer these questions, right? The Attorney General is obliged to answer these questions.
He is mandated, under these given circumstances to answer these questions.
Let me ask you this. In a couple of the questions, somebody is said to have given a statement against interest. What exactly is that? Against interest? Against your own interest?
No, if it is, you are giving, okay, so in criminal proceedings, you have a right to against self-incrimination. What that means is that you need not give a statement if it is going to incriminate yourself. I think what has happened here is that cannot avail. It cannot avail the ministers of government, because they have a duty to the country. As long as they continue to hold position despite calls for them to resign, they have not resigned. Despite calls for the Prime Minister to fire the members of his cabinet, he has not done so. He has not relieved them from their duties. So they cannot claim any kind of self-incrimination principle. They have to give the evidence. They have to come clear. They have to answer these questions for the public's interest. And that is simply because they have a higher duty to the public. When you hold public office, you have a duty not to protect yourself. You have a duty of accountability and transparency, one that is embedded in the Constitution. So when you take up your role, you have to remember, Andy, that when you take up public office, there is an oath of office which everyone takes. I have taken one as a member of parliament. Everyone would have taken one as a member of parliament, but the Prime Minister and the Attorney General would have taken a specific oath under the Constitution, and they have to fulfill their oath of office.
Right,
so they cannot put any personal principles of self-incrimination above their oath of office.
Right, it
does not work like that.
Right, we're going to have to leave it there. But let me just ask whether you think at this point, on this day, do you think Faris Al-Rawi's position is tenable? Is he going to have to go to the mat on this? Is he going to have to fall on his own sword at some point, however long it takes?
Yes, I believe so, Andy. I think that Mr. Al-Rawi really stretched the limits of what is tenable in terms of, public office. As Attorney General, one must ensure that, he does not get involved in matters which could potentially be a threat to the constitutional principles which you have taken an oath to protect. So I think he will have to fall on his own sword. I think more than that, I extend that. I think the nature and the extent to which they have breached democratic principles in this particular case arising out of this whole indemnity gate, Nelson gate, this prosecution, collapse of prosecution against former Attorney General Anand Ramlogan and Attorney at Law Gerald Ramlin. I think the government will have to ultimately basically call the election. And when I say call election, what I mean by this is that the nature of this is so bad, it is so damning, it is so far-reaching in consequences, adverse to the interests of the population, that the only way forward is not only that they must face, the answer questions in the public domain and face potential legal charges. The government needs a fresh mandate. The population must be the one to say, I still continue to repose confidence in you, notwithstanding the breach of the rule of law, notwithstanding the waning confidence in the administration of justice, notwithstanding the clear breach of your oath of office.
And for the current Attorney General, is he required to answer these questions? This is the Law Association putting these questions to him, not you, not the UNC. These are not politically motivated. Is he duty bound to answer them?
Well, legally, he's not compellable, right? So he's not bound to answer it. But it would be really, he would be faltering in his duty of public office, that here it is, you have a body such as the Law Association, which has a legislative remit to ensure that they promote the rule of law and they ensure that the administration of justice is being properly handled under Section 5 of the Legal Profession Act. It would really be an Attorney General faltering in his duty to account to a body which itself provides a check and balance to the exercise of power and exercise of rights. So I think that, yes, he's not compellable. They can't summon him. They can't serve him a summons and say, you have to come and provide a witness statement or give answers. But in terms of a legal duty, that may be so. But in terms of a public law duty, the Attorney General will be faltering and falling very short if it is he does not account, even by way of answering the questions to the Law Association. One would recall even the Chief Justice, somebody who is central to the administration of justice, when called upon to answer questions by the Law Association, did at some point in time submit himself to answering the questions because there was an investigation by the Law Association into the conduct of the Chief Justice.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there.
And that was in the recent years.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Dinesh Ramley, Member of Parliament of Shogunas West, attorney on this matter, and more will unfold. It seems clear from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you to your viewers and listeners.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we begin our quick look around the region before we get to our next guest, Professor Winston Sweet, on the question of reparations for the descendants of African slaves. Stay with us.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Site, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
Welcome back to the program. This is AM Prime on this day. We're talking now with Professor retired Winston Sweet. He's the chairman of an organization called the Universal Movement for the Reconstruction of Black Identity, and they are ramping up their calls for reparations for the descendants of African slaves, particularly in this part of the world. And that's a movement that is gaining more and more traction in different parts of the world, particularly in the Caribbean and elsewhere, where you have the descendants of African slaves. And there's also a movement, a separate movement for reparations for the descendants of the First Peoples, again in Trinidad and Tobago. That's a big issue. Professor Sweet, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, all right, so let's talk about the issue, where it's at, and how you're pushing against is it pushing against the fence for this? You hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
yes,
I was
sir.
saying, so let's get to it, to the discussion as to where the advocacy is now, and how you get to the point where you all are, what's the target here you're going after, to whom exactly, to try and make this a reality?
Well, our focus is ultimately to get reparation from the parties that caused the injury and crime of the millennia against the descendants of African people. We are therefore focusing on both the European governments that were involved and a number of other lesser parties or parties that are not as well listed in the debate. For instance, the local government organizations in the UK in particular, the British royal family, the British government, a number of beneficiaries, for instance, the museums and the National Trust in England, all the recipients of benefits from the actual enslavement of the African people. A number of universities, as well as the financial houses and the business spaces, many of which are still in existence, and only a few have identified themselves and expressed a willingness to even engage in discussion, far less to be prepared to admit guilt and the question of paying reparation.
So who are some of those? Who are some of those that have at least, you said, expressed a willingness to enter into discussions?
Well, the debate about the discussion is a difficult one. It is going on both in the United States and in the UK. A number of universities in the UK, Cambridge, Oxford, London, and some others, have in fact made public statements admitting their complicity in the issue. There have been several studies that have been carried out. The last major one done in the UK was done by the National Trust of Britain, where they were innocently doing a study of the history of their great houses in England for advertisement of their own business. And when the exercise was almost completed, they realized that not only the great houses that had been given to them or handed to them to be responsible for the development, but a number of the other great houses in Britain, in fact, were built by the exploitation of the African slaves. Well, of course, it's well known that Lloyd's of London and a number of the other Barclays and a number of other companies, some that have morphed into new names as time has passed. And then we have a number of the local government bodies in the UK, and particularly the ports that became extremely wealthy. For instance, we know that the University of Glasgow has come forward and engaged in talks with the University of the West Indies. But we only hope that a number of other bodies would step forward. In fact, the Anglican Church has made a statement in England as to its admission of complicity. And we in Trinidad are glad to learn that the Anglican Church, even in Barbados, has started to do what we started to do 3 or 4 years ago. That is to engage in public discourse as to the role of the Christian Church, not only the Catholic Church, but all the branches of the Christian Church and their involvement. And we welcome the participation with them to engage in this public education exercise.
All right, but public education is one thing, but you are calling for, well, you want tangible demonstration of the, whatever, the admission of
That's a very vexed question, and that's one of the issues I intend to deal with come this weekend in my talk, because there are a lot of areas of confusion where people ask, for instance, who should pay? Well, I will deal with that in great detail at my presentation. And what is the form? I have said before that to precede any serious discussion, the parties involved must first admit their complicity and guilt. That's the first stage. And the second stage is, having admitted their complicity, that they are willing to engage in discussion with parties involved. In the case of the West Indies, both CARICOM and the Caribbean governments on the one hand, and a number of people's organizations that have been active in the region over the last almost century in the struggle for reparation, that these parties who admit, and we hope all of them who are guilty and complicit will in fact engage in discussion both with the legitimate representatives through the governments of the region and CARICOM in particular, as well as the people's organizations that have been carrying this fight for decades.
All right, so that's a critical issue, because to me, in some cases, this is a line of inquiry that I have. So that the CARICOM Commission for Reparations is headed by the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies in Senegal, in Jamaica, Professor Hilary Beckles. Under him, Dr. Vereen Shepherd, and you have a range of people across the spectrum who are part of the CARICOM Commission. And then you have national committees, and you had one in Trinidad and Tobago that just fell apart for some reason, a national committee on reparations. But then you have other organizations such as yours and others, I suppose the organization led by Young Cambon and others, talking the same thing. What is the sense in which there has to be some kind of coming together of all the groups at different levels to make as comprehensive a case as possible, and how is that playing out in terms of what the demands are? And then you have the First Peoples making their own kinds of demands and calls for reparations and so on. At what point there has to be a coming together of all these groups who in different ways suffered the same fate and making the same sort of requests?
Well, you see, the difficulties that some people contemplate asking for a fixed sum of money, and from this fixed sum of money is how this fixed sum of money is to be dispersed. We do not believe that that is the route that we should pursue. We believe that the enslavement of the Africans, as Hilary Beckles himself has pointed out, has left us with a considerable number of ill effects. And ill effects can be corrected, late though it may be, by the installation and assistance and strengthening of existing institutions. For instance, the question of the health of the Caribbean people, particularly the descendants of, is a serious issue. The high incidence of diabetes, and that we seem to be the capital in the world for amputees that resulted from diabetes as well as blindness. And therefore, anybody who is seriously interested in repairing, reparation is about repairing, would have to get themselves involved in institutions strengthening and building to deal with that endemic problem that arose out of the diet of the African. There are certain other issues that are delicate, and many governments have attempted to shy away from. A fundamental issue that there has to be distribution of land. We learned from the African experience and even the American experience after the emancipation, that the issue of distribution of land to the African landless is one way to deal with the question of wealth between generations, which is one of the issues that the African descendants suffered from. They did not have, and still do not have, up to 2022, a distribution of land. And once that is not dealt with, as we saw in South Africa, there's no reparation. What you have is window dressing. You have, in fact, the situation becomes worse, and therefore we have political instability, crime, and vagrancy, and all these other things continue to live and to thrive. And a lot of people ask, why are you talking about reparation? This happened hundreds of years ago, blah, blah, blah. The problem is the fundamental disease has not been cured. So we are saying there is a lot that has to be done after the sitting down and looking at some of these issues, institutional strengthening, the educational system that we have inherited.
To what extent would you say that there's synchronicity or a lack of it among the various interest groups that are seeking the same kind of
let me deal with this. It's not to try to say who first and who this, but this is not a 2020 issue. This is not something that began with CARICOM recently. This is an issue that has been going on for a long time. So what we have is people are awakening to this and coming on board. Some of them not aware of the foundation and the history of the whole issue.
Well, this is what I'm trying to get at. This is what I'm trying to get at. Because even among the first peoples, there's a difference of opinion, one group to the other, about what to go for, how to proceed, and so on.
You mean the first peoples in Trinidad?
Yes.
Because there was a conference a few years ago in the region that attempted to bring the first peoples in the Caribbean together to deal with that issue.
Yes.
This is not an easy issue. This is a difficult issue. People have different perceptions, different organizations with different histories. This is why I'm saying that we are not going to get a consensus. What we have to get, in fact, is a platform of the basic issues that must be dealt with first. And this thing about distributing money is a distraction. I believe that what we have to look at, in fact, is to identify the first stages that people involved, organizations, corporate and institutional, must first admit. For instance, let us talk briefly about recently with the death of the Queen. A lot of people were talking about the royal family. That's a serious issue that we have to understand. And when the present King Charles was silent on the issue, and his son went to Jamaica and was confronted by the issue, I felt it was unfortunate that people were asking Junior, the prince, to make a public statement on reparation, when in fact that statement should have come from the soon-to-be king. And now that he is in office, it is his duty to talk about this. We have to attack, for instance, what is the role of the Commonwealth of Nations. And the issue of reparation must be dealt with through that institution also. That institution must also be brought into the discussion. And is that harmony of institutions that is a necessary condition.
How do you think we'll get there?
Before all of that,
Yes.
we must have an admission. We must have admission. For instance, the Christian church must admit its complicity in the exercise and its willingness to engage in discussion and to pay reparation. That is the first stage.
Right,
That is not going to happen tomorrow. Emancipation, there was a date, but slavery didn't take place last week. And the ill effects of slavery are long and festering. So we are not going to get a solution in the morning. We are going to have to work towards it. Those of us who are in the organization struggling for it. For instance, I have prepared an assault on the legal front. I did this and I've been waiting. In fact, I've been advised by some of my legal friends.
What do you mean an assault on the legal front? What do you mean?
Well, the question of raising the issue of reparation through the legal framework. And every time that issue is raised, we are told that the international court will not look at something like that. It has to come through countries have to bring it, and that it is too long past, and that is not in their jurisdiction. But the point is this: we have to crack the egg. We have to make the opening.
So what are you going to do?
We have to demand that this organization address the issue.
All right, so what are you going to do then to force that? What are you going to do when you say we have to demand? So you demand.
Well, I don't want to talk about what I personally done, but what has been done is the preparation of in a legal framework, which is going to be focused both through the United Nations agencies and through the international court. In other words, the struggle right now is to get audience to make the international court deal with the question of reparation.
All right, so we're talking now because your organization, Umrobi, is getting ready to have a congress or something on the issue. Is that it?
So what we are doing right now, and COVID had put a problem in our path, we had started a public discussion, and we did this jointly with the Anglican Church. The first one we did on the Santando's Promenade, and then we did one in St. James in a church, where we had the presence of the retired Bishop Duglin and a number of other priests who are willing to at least listen to what we have to say. And then my last presentation in St. James was when the Prime Minister, in fact, shut down the country correctly, and therefore we had to stop. This is COVID. So we are now in the process of resuming our public lectures and discussion. And more than lectures, the discussion is dealing with all the difficult issues, like who should get reparation, who should give reparation, what do we do, how do we build a common platform. For instance, some of us are not happy with what was going on here in Trinidad. In fact, a lot of people didn't even know that we had a national committee. And then lo and behold, that was changed and a new one set up. But be that as it may, what we intend to do, and jointly with the Anglican Church, is to pick up where we had got to. We had about 5 other scheduled discussions between North and South Trinidad. We are taking the issue of reparation and answering the difficult questions that people have, all kinds of issues.
So when is likely to be the resumption of that initiative?
The 29th.
29th.
The 29th in Princestown, where I was born and grew up. We will return to Princestown to have the first of the resumption to deal with these difficult questions. It will be 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the Anglican Church Hall. The Princestown Anglican Church is a historic structure in the whole exercise of emancipation and slavery. And we are glad to join with the Anglican Church to bring some clarity on this national issue. I have spent a number of years working on a number of different areas on the question of reparation. In other words, reparation has to be viewed in different periods. Reparation for the period of slavery from 1502 to 1834-38.
All right, we gotta go, but let me just ask you, so that is there going to be any representation from the Trinidad and Tobago National Committee on Reparations at that forum? And the Princestown Anglican Church.
This is Umrobi and the Anglican Church.
Yeah. All right.
In a bid at public education on the questions of reparation.
All right, and I think I could say that the Princestown Anglican Church is aligned to St. Stephen's College, where you went.
Yes,
correct?
Yes.
All right. We gotta leave it there. So thank you very much. We will pick it up at another appropriate juncture as we walk this journey about reparations in the Caribbean and elsewhere. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That is Professor Winston Sweet talking about, well, his organizations, the Universal Movement for the Reconstruction of the Black Identity, Umrobi, on their campaign for reparations for the descendants of African slaves. We will take a break. Much more on the other side. Stay with us.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point
weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the content capital.
With society plagued by a host of issues, with debates surrounding our urgent concerns falling short, with questions of our future not always being answered.
The conversation continues. Join me, Kemuel Pascal, as the voice of the youth comes to life. We will confront the controversial topics of today's world to gain answers that are key for a better tomorrow. One and One with me, Kemuel Pascal. Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Only on WESN, Content Capital.
I am Rondell Donowa, attorney at law and host of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Strictly Legal is a legal program geared towards informing you, the public, of your legal rights, responsibilities, and remedies. So be viewing Thursdays 10 a.m. to 10:30 a.m.
Today we're talking about cosmetic medicine, and we're on set at Relax Med Aesthetics.
We are like famous all over the world for this glow. You could in an airport, you could spot a Caribbean over there. Oh my God, she's from Trinidad.
She's definitely from Trinidad.
Yeah. So I felt like that was something that we needed to feel like we belonged, and we needed to feel empowered that our skin color was really important.
Step we've been waiting for is the chemical peel, right? So I'm gonna start applying.
What's up, Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
That's all the big, son. Bungie, remember them days? Well, all right, Bungie might remember, but Ian Alvarez remember them. Don't forget the rest of the room, Ian. Forget the rest. Me and you talking alone here. Ian, remember the days when you went to the fridge with your hot bake in your hand to get blue band butter, but the blue band butter done. And you went for the yellow, the golden ray. Take the shaking of it. No, listen, you don't know what that is when you bite a bake with golden ray, my dear. Once that big hot with golden ray,
Saturday, November 5th, Shore Park, Tobago. It's Million Laughs Caribbean Comedy Commerce, the mega laugh festival to end the Tobago Carnival season, featuring Tobago's finest in folklore and musical entertainment, together with some of the Caribbean's top comedians, Larry Joseph, Daryl the Saint Mendoza, Dolores, Alan the Entertainer, Handsome Sun, Mako Media, and more. Get your ticket specials available on Island E-Tickets and various outlets nationwide, or visit the Million Laughs handles for more info. It's Comedy Commerce in Tobago, a wee kind of commerce.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
Welcome back to the program. Moments from now, we'll be talking with Mr. David Rosenblatt. He's the Regional Economic Advisor for the Caribbean at the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB. We'll get to him in a moment, but let's just take a look around the region. We'll make one stop in St. Lucia, where they're saying that one public servant got his parking ticket revoked after taking the traffic arm of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force to task. We have a report from MCB Prime News. Take a look.
Motorists who park along the right side of McVeigh Road, Barnard Hill, were ticketed for improper parking on Monday, August 22nd and Tuesday, August 23rd in what could be described as a mass ticketing by the Traffic Department of the Royal St. Lucia Police. Barnard Hill is the home of NBC Television, Department of Labor, the Monsignor Patrick Anthony Folk Research Center, and several residential properties. The street has been a common parking spot for residents of the area, office workers along the stretch of road, public officers, as well as general motorists. On August 22nd, NBC Prime aired No Parking, calling into question the reason for the mass ticketing. Communications Manager for the Ministry of Equity, John Emmanuel, was among the many ticketed for improper parking. He sought to gain clarification on the charge. According to Emmanuel, at the time the charge was issued, there were no clear indications that individuals were prohibited from parking along the stretch. To date, no such adjustment has been made. Instead of dismissing the ticket, he decided to contest the matter, calling into question the merit of the charge issued.
But in a matter of principle, I just think that the traffic department could have gone about their business in a different way. There are many, many more public officers out there that got similar tickets. And as opposed to them just saying, I'm not going to pay it, I thought the best way was to allow the system to take its course, to go in and to plead your case and to say why you felt that it was unjust. And I came out victorious this morning.
Emmanuel also noted many inconsistencies with the charge. According to him, what was unacceptable at one point in the day seemed to be acceptable the next.
I monitored it myself. I'm a creature of the area, and I can see what is happening, and it just seemed totally unfair. And I'm happy this morning that at least I got some reprieve, but I'm thinking constantly of the other people, unsuspecting people who may come to the area to either do business, to come to one of the government offices, or even public offices trying to park so that they can be productive. And the end result is getting a traffic ticket where there are no signs and nothing at all to indicate to them that their actions are against the law.
His victory at Wednesday's hearing was not one to gloat about, but rather suggest that the communicative arm of the department give direct indication to the parking situation. This would prevent motorists from being blindsided in the future.
I think the majority of people that are parking in that particular area, public officers or people who come to do business, are law-abiding people. I think if there were some signs indicating or signage indicating that it was an illegal or a bad practice, that they would have ceased from doing so. And I felt the traffic department could have gone about it in a better way. They could have informed, they could have put up a sign, they could have done some road markings. There's a television and a radio station right next door. They could have partnered with NBC Real FM and get the word out. And then based on that, then you can issue tickets after. None of that happened.
The charge contested was Section 82, Part 1 of the Traffic Laws of St. Lucia. The law states, improper parking, Part 1. A person shall not leave or cause a motor vehicle or trailer to remain stationary in such a way that it presents a danger to others or obstructs traffic.
All right, so we're back inside now, and my guest in this segment of the program is Mr. David Rosenblatt. He's the Regional Economic Advisor for the Caribbean at the Inter-American Bank in Washington, the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. We're talking about the economic outlook for the Caribbean and matters incidental thereto, as they say. Mr. Rosenblatt, thanks for being our guest. Thanks for coming on.
Great pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's talk about it. So give us a sense as to why you're here, what you're doing.
Well, the big reason why I'm here is to finally get my feet on the ground after this terrible period of the pandemic, right? And it's been very frustrating to be stuck in Washington and not to visit countries and hear from people, see what's going on, meet with people in government, meet with people in the private sector, and get a different perspective on what's going on in the region.
Yeah. And of course, the Inter-American Development Bank is an institution of the Organization of American States, of the Inter-American system, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so who do you meet when you come here on a mission such as this? Who do you meet with, and what are you looking for?
It ranges from meeting with students at UE, which I'll be doing on Thursday, to meeting with people in government in the Ministry of Planning, to meeting with the central bank in the research department there, where we have a dialogue on different economic research issues. And really the objective is to see where we can help, to follow up on things that we're already working on, and to also learn. I'm all ears when I come to the region. I was in Guyana last week and delighted to be here in Trinidad today.
Yeah. So Guyana last week, Trinidad and Tobago this week, when next, Barbados and so on? Or
I haven't planned my next trip, but as soon as I can get back in the air, I'll be back in the region.
Yeah. So you have a sense of what the situation is in Trinidad and Tobago now, where we are economically speaking and so on? And
absolutely, a general sense.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll understand more once I travel back to Washington on Saturday after spending this time here. But yes, I mean, what we're seeing across the region is a recovery, thankfully, finally from the depths of this terrible pandemic recession that affected the entire region. And we've been very hopeful over the last year about that recovery and trying to return to some of the longer standing issues that affect long-term economic growth, rather than just try to monitor the daily events as economies were just diving into this deep recession that occurred in 2020 and started to emerge. How the economy started to emerge in late 2021.
So you don't have a list of prescriptions that you come in to try and so that's the job of the other agency. Yeah.
Well, no, because prescriptions don't really work, right? And that's precisely why I'm here. Right? Each country has its own specific challenges. What does help though sometimes is understanding what's going on in similar nations, right? So that's why we have a quarterly bulletin where we try to provide a regional perspective on economic challenges, and also have country chapters that look at the specifics of each country.
Yeah, so you make comparisons between, say, what you may have found and discovered in Guyana to what the situation is in Trinidad and Tobago?
To some extent, yes. In those two specific cases, it's a little bit different because they are in such different, they have such different economic structures, right? For now, Trinidad and Tobago as a mature hydrocarbon producer and also with a fairly sizable industrial base. Guyana is at quite a different stage of development, but we do learn from each other, right? For example, you have here in Trinidad the Heritage and Stabilization Fund that has been in place for decades. Guyana has its Natural Resource Fund, which is structured somewhat differently. Suriname, which is hoping to be a big hydrocarbon producer in a few years, they have their own legislation on a sovereign wealth fund, and so since we are working with all three countries, we can try to see how each country has done that and bring that to bear when we're having a bilateral dialogue with government officials in each country.
You have a sense of, to what extent you can talk about what the nature is and the operations of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund in Trinidad and Tobago? Because among ourselves we argue about sometimes if we're putting in enough, if we're taking out enough. A lot of people watch that, if we're taking out too much, and how do we draw down on that when times are difficult. That was an issue, say, in the period in which there was financing that was necessary to deal with the shutdown of the society in the heights of COVID, for instance.
Exactly, and it was used quite appropriately during the downturn because that's why it's there, right? I think the title of the fund is kind of self-explanatory to some extent, right? And stabilization, right? And so, as a stabilization fund, it's really quite significant, right? Around 25% of GDP. That's very large by international standards. In the heritage function, right, for future generations, 25% of GDP is not necessarily that large, right? There are some countries out there, not in the Western Hemisphere, but in other places in the world where the heritage function is maybe 2 or 3 times GDP rather than a fraction of GDP.
Yeah. Right? So your surveillance of these things allows you to say to the managers of these things, most times is the Minister of Finance and his team and so on, whether or not what they're doing is consistent with what the objectives are and the very name of what the fund is, for instance. Because there are arguments politically a lot of times about how much is taken out, when it is taken out, for what, and so on. There are guidelines on those things, right?
Exactly, yes. And in the case of Trinidad, the fund is extremely well structured in terms of the governance structures and the legal basis. And again, it was used for what it's for during the economic crisis. And I realize there are plans now to actually put some money back as price movements have become favorable in the hydrocarbon markets.
Yeah. So when you look at it, you make any judgments, or you will offer advice to the managers to say, well, maybe you should not have gone in there in this way, or the percentage going in on the heritage, because a lot of people argue with that the heritage part of it sometimes is not treated as it should be.
We wouldn't get into the specifics of that per se on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, again, because it is such a long-standing fund and well-structured, and it's meeting certain functions extremely well. And there are broader issues there, right? And that's what we've been trying to get into more, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in other countries in the region, about broader issues for the future of economic growth, right? Which in the end starts with firm growth and entrepreneurs.
With?
Firm growth, the growth of companies and firms and entrepreneurs, right? And in order for that to happen, business people need access to certain things, right? One of the things they need access to is finance. So our last quarterly Caribbean Economics Quarterly was using firm-level data, interviews with firms across the region that took place in late 2020, early 2021, and asking them what are the barriers to finance, right? And so we're trying to focus on some of these longer-term structural issues again, for some countries, the hydrocarbon price boom is favorable, like Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. For other countries that are oil importers or gas importers, it's not so favorable, right? And so getting past some of these short-term issues and helping countries to think through how to deal with that, but then still remain focused on the longer-term structural issues.
And then do you find that sometimes you see things that, is it within your remit to advise on what to do as opposed to what not to do?
It certainly is within our remit to provide our honest opinion based on analysis, right? And again, but the ultimate responsibility is with governments, and we always respect that. All these countries have democratic traditions, and ultimately, the governments represent the people, right? And so what we try to do is provide advice, and it can be behind closed doors, it can be friendly conversation, it can be in dialogue with the private sector as well, but it is really based, our opinions are our opinions, right? Yeah. And what we do try to do is make sure that whatever opinions we form are based on good analysis.
Yeah, and what is for people who sometimes mix up the role and function of say the IDB from the IMF?
Right, correct. So the IMF was set up to deal with short-term balance of payments crises, right? Yeah. They are, sometimes in vernacular people refer to them as the firefighters, yes. Right? So when countries desperately need financing to get through an external shock. I mean, external shock is kind of a economist term, but it could be a hurricane. It could be a drop in the prices of your main exports, whatever. Yeah. Countries sometimes need short-term financing, and they go to the IMF to get that, right? Our function, along with other regional development banks focused on other regions, and along with the World Bank and other financing institutions, is to focus on long-term economic growth, right? And long-term inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And so we finance long-term development projects, and we also do a lot of analytic work and research that we hope can inform the policy debate in countries.
Long-term sustainable growth and so on.
Yes.
Well, you have numbers now as to where we are, if not Trinidad, but you do this country by country, right?
Yes,
so you know,
correct.
You have some details about where we are, where we should have been. There have been arguments about how we spent during the pandemic. Some people on the side of those in charge, so this is what we had to do. Other people would look at it and say, well, you know, we didn't do enough, or
well, you know, everyone has to work within their limitations, right? Yeah. And so you know, you can never make the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And whenever one enters a difficult situation like this country did, but all the countries on earth, right? Yeah. The pandemic was something that affected economies everywhere, right? And so countries had to deal with the resources they had, the current finances that they had entering the crisis, and make do. And everyone was learning as the crisis went on, right? Yeah. I mean, in March of 2020, none of us knew for sure how long this was going to last. And you know, and it's really been complex for policymakers around the world, whether it's the United States policymakers trying to figure out the battle against inflation, right, at the Fed, yeah. Because it was a very different type of recession than the normal recession, and the recovery has had different characteristics than a normal recovery that we've experienced in the past.
Yeah, so are there are other groups of countries in different parts of the world that are comparable to in the Caribbean, for instance. You talk about the Andean Development Bank and other sort of area banks like that. These perform the same kinds of functions as the IDB would for these countries. Of course, you have to be a member of the OAS to be in the IDB, right?
Well, you know, I'm not sure whether OAS membership is absolutely required, but the membership is different, yeah. Right? So to be a member of the IDB, you do have to contribute some capital.
Right.
And so there are, for example, the OECS countries are not members of the IDB. We do provide some support to the OECS countries through the Caribbean Development Bank.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Where we'll provide some capital to the Caribbean Development Bank to finance projects or programs in the OECS countries.
In the OECS. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I'd say you make comparisons between what the situation is, say, in the IDB countries as opposed to in the Andean bank countries.
Well, the Andean bank countries are also our countries, right?
Right, because that's part of the Inter-American system as well.
Yeah, it's sort of there isn't a perfect umbrella, right, for describing the different structures, or the CAF, as I think you read, the Andean Bank, right? Which is still, they have their own membership with slightly, I don't recall exactly the difference between their membership and our membership. Right. Now it is true, we compete, right? And that's good. I mean, that's good for Trinidad. That's good for other countries because they have more than one place to go. Trinidad doesn't really go to the World Bank anymore, but in other countries, the World Bank is quite present, and that's great. And there are bilateral donors too. So sometimes, you know, we pull our forces together in a very organized, collaborative way. And other times, governments have the right to choose, pick and choose who they want to work with and on what, right? Yeah. Because you know, a government might choose to work on a certain sector with a certain agency and another sector with us.
Yeah. So during the time that you're here, who are the, not necessarily the personalities, but the agencies and the organizations you meet with to get the sense that you're required to have to do the work when you go back?
Well, first of all, we're having meetings with the Ministry of Economic Development, right? Ministry of Development, which is also, the minister is our governor on the governors, for representing the country with the Board of Governors. And then also meeting with the central bank and also meeting with private sector associations to hear from them what's going on. Because, also, by the way, we do have our private sector financing arm, the IDB Invest, right? And our representative here, Karina Coburn, represents both the public sector, the sovereign lending side, and the private sector side. We also have IDB Lab, which engages with the private sector on innovative new projects. So I'm going to listen and learn, right, from all these groups and also the university, and have a dialogue, right? The idea is to exchange views and see where we can help, whether it's through, my personal role is more on the analytics side, right, and developing research programs and that sort of thing. But also those analytics and those research programs do feed into the lending program as well.
Yeah. So in your preparations for wherever you go, but in Trinidad and Tobago, what might be some of the big ticket items that you have been encouraged to look at and ask for questions on?
Well, actually, we did a country strategy for, as an institution, we did a country strategy, the whole group, right, including the private sector side, for Trinidad and Tobago last year. And the focus there is on the theme of digitalization.
Yeah, digitalization,
right?
Yes.
Which affects everything, right? It affects the private sector, it affects the public sector, it affects the relationship between the public sector and the private sector. So that's like an issue number one in the current times? Well, probably yes, because it's so instrumental in the modern world in terms of, if you think about the long-standing agenda of diversification, of getting beyond traditional sectors here, in the modern world, digital is going to be a part of it, right? And almost anything you do nowadays, whether it's the education sector, the water sector, whether it's the basics of government registrations, whether it's identification cards for citizens, right? Everything involves a digital component.
And how is the process made easier by your intervention and input? If intervention might be too strong a term.
Yeah, right. Well, my personal input, right, is just to bring to bear some evidence, right, and from research and analysis, and we did that late last year, early this year, with a document that takes advantage of some in-house research that was done on the economic impact of digitalization, and so we can sort of help make the case, right, for societies to move forward on this agenda, right? And it is societies, right? It's not just government. It's government and the people and businesses and institutions all have to be on board with this. And so that's more of what I try to do. But we have sector specialists who can look at the technical side of the ICT, right? We have education and health specialists who know how digital technology has been brought to bear in improving efficiency and quality of public services in those sectors. So we have all this range of people who either can share those ideas and experiences, but then also they can share those ideas and experiences embodied in an actual lending operation, right? If it comes to that, right?
Yeah. What do you know about the processes by which sometimes there's agreement that this question of digitalization has been around for some time, and there are constraints to get it going, to kick it off and have it running and so on? What do you know about what provides these constraints? With the institutional weakness, because you talk about institutional strengthening and the weaknesses in the systems.
Look, there's the basic infrastructure itself that has to be in place, right? And you have to start with that. There are issues of regulation in terms of making it easier for firms and people to have access to those services. But there's even the basics of getting people on board.
Yeah.
right? And so, we have
getting the right people.
Well, also just changing people's attitudes, right? It's as simple as that. I'm not that young anymore myself, right? And I'm not as good with technology as some of my younger colleagues in my team. And so sometimes getting people to, even when it's delivered on a plate, right? To some people, it's hard for them to say, okay, I'm just going to use this new service that's available to me. They're looking at their phone, they don't know how to use it, right?
They're accustomed to it.
And so there's a whole education, and there's a whole issue of trying to get people on board. We're looking at, we have a researcher at the IDB who's a specialist in behavioral economics, and we're trying to look at some of these behaviorally informed interventions.
Behavioral economics. I don't know what that is, but you're going to have the great talking to you, sir.
Yeah.
And well, best of luck, and hope you have a good trip and a good exercise and understanding. We'll continue to see where we're at and give you 2 cents worth as to how we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much,
David
Mr.
Rosenblatt.
Thank you.
That's our broadcast for this edition of the program. We thank you for watching. We thank all our guests. Andy Johnson telling you in about half an hour, the guys will come in for today's edition of Talking Point after the news at the top of the hour. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.
WESN.
Secret Girls IC School presents One